And what you can see are live shots coming in from Singapore's Nanyang University, where Indian Prime Minister has just arrived. And he, as you can see, is interacting with a group of students. And of course, India and Singapore are expected to be signing undertakings of joint projects in education and research as well. So the Nanyang University is, of course, a very pivotal point of his tour. It was earlier during the day when Prime Minister Modi and his Singaporean counterpart, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, announced how technology will be playing a very integral role between India and Singapore, and that India is looking forward to enhance its relationship with Singapore in terms of technology. Prime Minister Modi also mentioned that through Digital India initiative, he will be making a data centers policy. All right, and let's also go across to our political editor Karthikeya Sharma, who's joining us live from outside the Shangri-La Hotel, where the Shangri-La Dialogue is all set to take place. And it will be the first time that an Indian Prime Minister will be addressing this key strategic gathering. It's over to you, Karthikeya. Of course, as we all know, that it is going to be a very, very important dialogue. Also, what makes the anticipation grow further is the fact that there might be a pull aside between US Defense Secretary Jim Mattis and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Thank you, Akansha, but I think, the pull aside with Mattis is part of a larger matrix, and pull aside can range from courtesies to serious talks, so I will not speculate on what will be the nature of pull aside between Prime Minister Modi and Mattis. And we have to remember that he's a defense minister, so there's also a protocol difference that will decide the time also. But this, I would say, a summit or meeting of minds of people who make a difference to defense and foreign policy has been an institution since 2002 onwards. And to put that in perspective, and the context of and the time when the Prime Minister is going to make a speech, and especially in the wake of the Korean crisis, I am being joined by Dhruv Jaishankar, a fellow of foreign policy at Brookings, India. Dhruv, put it in perspective for our viewer, the Prime Minister's speech, in context of the, if not the crisis, if that's not the right word, the current scenario where China is asserting itself like a co-hegemon in a new world.
So, the Shangri-La Dialogue, as you mentioned, has been around for some time. I've been attending now for 5 years, this is the 5th year I've come, and this is in some ways the premier summit for discussing security issues in Asia. Last year, the Australian Prime Minister gave the keynote lecture. A few years ago, it was the Japanese Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe. And India has sometimes attended, sometimes not. Defense Minister Parrikar came a few years ago. But this year is in some ways quite special because it is the Indian Prime Minister giving the keynote. And it really is, in that sense, an opportunity to lay out for this audience, and we have participants from Russia, from the US, from China, from Australia and New Zealand, and across Southeast Asia. It's really an opportunity to present to all of these people an Indian vision for how they want to see the Asia-Pacific, the Indo-Pacific region ordered.
There is a bit of a chest thumping which has been happening when it comes to Indian diplomacy or power projection. People or one can say that it's appreciated by the domestic market, but the world sees it very differently. So, in context of India as a power integrating itself in the ASEAN or the Southeast Asian, South Asian world, do you think that we somehow end up punching below our weight, and economies like Singapore, they end up punching above their weight?
So I think it's very difficult to say. I mean, I think whether you're talking economically or strategically or in strict military terms, I think India has a lot that it brings to the table. It has a very large military, quite a sophisticated military compared to many others in the region. There was recently a think tank in Australia called the Lowy Institute put out what was called the Asia Power Index, and they assessed power, and they put India on par with Japan, or a little behind Japan, as the fourth most capable power in Asia after the United States and China. And I think that India does bring a lot of things to the table. I think we need to appreciate that point. That said, India also has very significant limitations, and I I think Indians also need to appreciate that. And where are the ways that India can do more to punch at its weight, at the very least? One big area is in terms of economic influence. And in that sense, particularly in Southeast Asia, India is not seen as present as China is. China's a massive trade partner here, as the US is, as Japan is. Japan's a major investor in the region. And so India is in some ways missing in that element. Its power projection capabilities, while India has is very capable in its ability to defend itself and its near neighborhood, its ability to project power more widely is still somewhat limited. And so I think these are some important limitations still. But even keeping that in mind, I think it's significant what India has done in the region to help preserve a balance.
Dhruv, what sort of speech do you expect from Prime Minister Narendra Modi in a scenario where you have a Korean crisis taking place, the eyes of the world are set there. We have a Prime Minister who is more glued into what's happening in his neighborhood. That is why you have those so-called meetings where there is no declaration. One happened in Wuhan, one happened in Sochi, one almost happened in Santiniketan when Sheikh Hasina was there. So in those at times where the attention of the world is at a different crisis, we are tuned into a different thing. What sort of speech do you expect from the Prime Minister?
Well, no, as I said, I think it's about laying out a broader vision for how India sees the security order changing. And I think, immediately, of course, there's a lot of focus on North Korea. There was expected to be a summit here between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un in Singapore. But I think if you look, there are a number of other things happening in the region beyond the immediate Korea crisis that deserve significant attention. I suspect some of these will be alluded to by the Prime Minister. I think the South China Sea, maybe if not specifically, I think there'll be some clear on the importance of freedom of navigation and the destabilizing nature of China's activities in the South China Sea. That'll be one of them. I think Belt and Road will be another. More broadly, that there are security concerns, and it is adding to the new lines of competition in some ways. The maps are roads and railway networks and ports. I think that'll be another issue. I think emphasizing again what India does bring to the table. I think the fact that India is willing to play a bigger role in the Western Pacific, which it was not able to do, or willing to do a few years ago.
I'll stop you here. Dhruv has used the word bigger role. Before I let go of him, when you, in context of the opinion you wrote, when you talk about the bigger role, it means bigger projection. It means deeper engagement. What India needs to do for a bigger role and to be perceived as a player abroad?
I mean, I don't think perceptions matter beyond a point. I think the reality matters more. But, I mean, I'll give you a few examples of things that India's done just in the last year. It's stepped up naval deployments around the Indian Ocean region. It's entered into bilateral agreements with countries like Oman, with Singapore, most recently with Indonesia, to try and gain access to strategic facilities. It has entered into logistics supply agreements with the United States and France, and this enables, for example, the Indian Navy to refuel in the Sea of Japan, as far away as that. So these are some very concrete things that are taking place that are helping India project power more broadly. Now, it's still limited in many ways. The Indian Navy still has only 17% or so of the defense budget. Okay. There are a number of very important constraints.
Dhruv, hold your point for a minute. Yes, Akansha, you wanted to come in? Yes.
Karthike, it was just a short while ago that we heard a joint press statement by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Singaporean Prime Minister Lee. And, what have been the areas of focus and how is Singapore rising as a key strategic partner for India? I would like Dhruv also to comment on that.
Yeah, actually a good question. Ansha, my colleague from Newsroom wants to ask you that how has Singapore emerged as a key strategic partner with India?
Singapore, I think, it has a special significance for India in the region. It's in some ways India's closest defense partner. It's also a hub for connectivity in the region. It's the most linked by air. It is a major transshipment hub for India. So both commercially and strategically, Singapore has become quite important. Its security relationship is quite unique. So, for example, the Singaporean Army and Air Force actually conduct exercises in India. And this is a very unique arrangement that India has with another country. Recently there was a maritime arrangement that was signed in November of last year by the Singaporean Defence Minister when he visited India. So this tells you in some ways how Singapore is emerging in some ways as a key strategic partner for India.
And especially even in the context, if you have to put this internationally, Singapore is a place where the meeting may, if it takes place, between the American president and the leader of the most reclusive state in the world.
So it is in some ways a neutral hub, but for India especially, I think it has assumed a more significant dimension as a security partner, and again as a gateway for Southeast Asia more broadly. So again, a lot of financing comes via Singapore. It's the second largest source of FDI into India. So again, for all of these reasons, I think Singapore has emerged as a particularly special partner for India in the neighborhood.
Thank you, Dhruv. So, Akansha, this summit is not only about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's speech, it reflects, redefines priorities. When a lot of people come in, generally people have an idea this is about one speech. You have working groups here. Sometimes these working groups they create vision documents. So, it's the whole, I would say, the platform, which is very, very important. It's like, for example, Ram Madhav is going to speak here in an hour's time here. So, you have a lot of speakers like that. I just, met the Canadian Defence Minister who made so much headlines 6 months back. So, a lot of minds, a lot of people who make difference when it comes to foreign policy and strategic affairs. Akansha.
Absolutely, Karthikeya. Quite a great confluence of ideas and countries meeting over there at the Shangri-La Dialogue. Thank you so much, Karthikeya and Dhruv, for bringing us all those details. We will continue to track Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Singapore.